Thank you very much.
Playing politics with the war. What was that? I asked her, is Prime Minister Netanyahu playing politics with the war?
I don't think so. He's trying to work out a serious problem he has. Thank you.
This is my video update on this Wednesday, midday, June the 5th. Let's talk about some news. And let's start things off with Biden's interview with Time magazine, an interview which was conducted on May 28th, but was published yesterday by Time. And in this interview, Biden talked about Trump, he talked about China and Taiwan, he discussed Israel and Netanyahu, and of course, he talked about Putin and Project Ukraine. On Trump, Biden said that European leaders are afraid of a Trump presidency. They're very worried about Trump becoming president. On Taiwan, Biden said that U.S. boots on the ground cannot be ruled out. If the circumstances dictate, then U.S. troops could find themselves in Taiwan. And with regards to Netanyahu and Israel, Biden basically said that Netanyahu may be prolonging the conflict in Gaza for self-preservation reasons. Some in Israel have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? This is the question that the Time journalist asked Biden, and Biden said, "I'm not going to comment on that. There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. And I would cite that as, before the war began, the blowback he was getting from the Israeli military for wanting to change the Constitution, change the court. And so it's an internal domestic debate that seems to have no consequence. And whether he would change his position or not, it's hard to say, but it has not been helpful." I'm reading you from the transcript of the interview that Time magazine has published. That is why the word constitution, I read it as constitu, change the court. This is exactly what Biden told Time magazine. So this is an exact transcript of the interview. And so it's very hard to follow Biden's answers in this transcript. So this is going to be quite an interesting read through. So that brings us to Biden discussing Project Ukraine. And the Time magazine journalists, they asked Biden, so understanding Putin's aims, the world, the West, the United States, and you find yourself facing a difficult situation in Ukraine, the war is stalled every day, an average of 42 Ukrainian civilians are killed or wounded. Is Russia's proposal to end the war in Ukraine the best that Ukraine can hope for at this point? That's the question from Time. Here is Biden's answer. No, it's not. And by the way, I don't know why you skip over all that's happened in the meantime. The Russian military has been decimated. You don't write about that. It's been freaking decimated. Number one. Number two, NATO is considerably stronger than it was when I took office. I put it together. Not only did I reestablish the fact that it was the strongest alliance in the history of the world, I was able to expand it. While I was in One of the G7 meetings in Europe, when I got back, I called on the president of Finland because when I had met earlier in the year with Putin, he said he wanted to see the Finlandization of NATO. I told him he's going to get not the Finlandization, the NATOization of Finland. And everybody thought, including you guys, thought I was crazy. 1 second here. Are you telling me that Biden was able to say Finlandization of NATO? No way. No freaking way. No way was Biden able to say Finlandization of NATO or NATOization of Finland. There's no way. Come on, Time Magazine. Come on now. Anyway, let's move on. And guess what? I did it. I did it. And we're now the strongest nation. We have the strongest alliance in all of America, all of history. In the meantime, what we keep skipping over is what the consequence of the success of Russia in Ukraine would be. That's why I brought this along. You probably haven't read it. Most people haven't read it. He says this is part of reestablishing the Soviet Union. That's what this is all about. It wasn't just about taking part of. He wanted to go back to the days when there was NATO and there was that other outfit that Poland, everybody belonged to. So that's what it was about. And in the meantime, what happened was we were able to. And by the way, we spent a lot of money in Ukraine, but Europe has spent more money than the United States has collectively. Europe has spent more money than the United States has collectively. Europe has spent more money in taking on Russia. Okay, so, all right, I think I understand what Biden is getting at here. That other outfit, by the way, is referencing the Warsaw Pact. The other outfit that Poland, comma, everybody belonged to. There was that other outfit that Poland, comma, everybody belonged to. I think he forgot the Warsaw Pact anyway. So that's Biden talking about the Finlandization of NATO, and instead what Russia got was the NATOization of Finland. What else? What else did Biden say? The U.S. has spent a lot of money in Ukraine. We know that. Europe has spent a lot of money in Ukraine. We know that as well. But he talks a lot about how NATO is the most powerful alliance in the world, in all of history. And the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world, in all of history. And everybody thought, including you guys, thought I was crazy. I can imagine Biden saying all of this, the low voice, the high voice, the low voice, the high voice, losing his train of thought, and then just moving on to the next topic or the next sentence. So then the Time reporters, they asked Biden, so what is the end game, though, in Ukraine, and what does peace look like there? And here is what Biden answered. Peace looks like making sure Russia never, that's never 4 times, never occupies Ukraine. That's what peace looks like. And it doesn't mean NATO. They are part of NATO. It means we have a relationship with them like we do with other countries, where we supply weapons so they can defend themselves in the future. But it is not. If you notice, I was the one when, and you guys did report it at Time, the one that I was saying that I am not prepared to support the NATOization of Ukraine. It should not. It is not. I spent a month in Ukraine when I was a senator and vice president. There was significant corruption. There was a circumstance that was really difficult. And so the point is, though, that if we ever let Ukraine go down, mark my words, you'll see Poland go. And you'll see all those nations along the actual border of Russia, from the Balkans and Belarus. And all those, they're going to make their own accommodation Okay, so Biden kind of loses it here in this response. The first answer, the first question that he answered, he kept it together. He kept it for the most part pretty together. This second question on Russia, he kind of loses it. Never, 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 never occupies Ukraine. That's the goal. Never, ever, 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 ever. Sorry, Miss Jackson. Outcast. Anyway, it doesn't mean it, and it doesn't mean NATO. They are part of NATO. It doesn't mean Ukraine is going to be a part of NATO, and then he says they are part of NATO. Okay, whatever. Whatever. Okay, so it means the U.S. is going to continue to provide a lot of weapons to Ukraine, of course. that's given. He spent 1 month in Ukraine when he was a senator and vice president. It was much more than a month, and there was a lot of corruption. Biden says, "Yeah, we know, Biden. $1 billion to get the prosecutor fired. Son of a gun, Poroshenko fired the prosecutor. 10% for the big guy. We know, Biden. There is a lot of corruption in Ukraine. Believe me, we know. And son of a gun, he fired that prosecutor." Boy, in Belarus is also going to fall to Russia if they win in the conflict in Ukraine. The Balkans as well. They're bringing up the Balkans a lot. This has me worried. This has me very worried. They constantly mention the Balkans. If Russia wins in Ukraine, they're going to go after the Balkans. The Balkans. And Belarus. I don't think Biden really understands Belarus's relationship to Russia yet. I don't think anyone's clued him in on the relationship between Belarus and Russia at the moment. Anyway, I want to switch to Israel. This is the Time reporters again. I want to switch to Israel, but on the last point, is there a danger that NATO is on a slippery slope to war with Ukraine, with Russia, as things stand? Biden's answer, no. We're on a slippery slope for war if we don't do something about Ukraine. It's just not gonna anyway. It's just not gonna ... anyway ... He lost his train of thought there. I tell you, he broke down. He was breaking down. The first question was a lot. That was a lot. NATOization of Finland. I can hardly say it. NATOization of Finland. Finlandization of NATO. It's a lot, man. It takes a lot of brain power. So he got through the first question. The second question, you could see he started to lose his train of thought. And then the third question, he lost it. Anyway, he said, anyway, whatever. I can't answer anymore. Is there a danger that NATO is on a slippery slope to war with Ukraine? I can't answer that anyway. Move on. Oh, boy. No, we're on a slippery slope for war if we don't do something about Ukraine. We're on a slippery slope for war if we don't escalate towards nuclear war with Russia. That's basically what Biden is saying, and that he just loses it. Anyway, he says, anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to Israel, and that's where he says that Netanyahu is probably prolonging the war for self-preservation reasons. So that's the Biden interview with Time magazine. And now let's talk about the Telegraph article that was published yesterday, which talks about a document which details how the United States will enter land corridors in Europe should Russia begin to invade NATO territory. NATO land corridors could rush U.S. troops to front line in event of European war. That is what the Telegraph UK is running with. Wow. That's some pretty heavy stuff, man. Pretty heavy stuff. We got a map as well. We got a map. Pre-planned logistical routes could help stave off a potential Russian attack. We got a corridor coming in from the Netherlands, Germany, Poland. That's corridor number one. Corridor number 2 is Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary. Corridor number 3 is Greece, Bulgaria, Romania. Corridor number 4, Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania. And number 5 is Norway, Sweden, Finland. And you can see all the arrows there to get to the borders with Russia. Wow. Pretty scary stuff. Let's see what the Telegraph is reporting here. NATO is developing multiple land corridors to rush U.S. troops and armor to the front lines in the event of a major European ground war with Russia. American soldiers would land at one of 5 ports and be channeled along pre-planned logistical routes to confront a possible attack by Moscow, officials told the Telegraph. It comes amid warnings from the alliance's top leaders that Western governments must prepare themselves for a conflict with Russia in the next 2 decades. Logistical routes have become a key priority since NATO leaders agreed to prepare 300,000 troops to be kept in a state of high readiness to defend the alliance at a summit in Vilnius, Lithuania last year. That was the NATO summit where Alinsky got dressed up in his best green outfit and was shunned by NATO officials. All the NATO officials were hanging out and laughing and enjoying themselves, and Alinsky was photographed off on the sidelines, looking very pissed off and very upset because he didn't get a NATO invite. So that's the Telegraph. Existing plans have U.S. troops landing at Dutch ports before boarding trains and transport them through Germany and onwards to Poland. Okay, I already talked about the other 4 routes. The main route is the route through the Netherlands. That's the main route. And then they have the other 4 routes. In these corridors, national militaries will not be restricted by local regulations and will be free to transport consignments without normal restrictions. So in the next 2 decades, let's do some Annalena math, 2 decades. A decade is 10 years, some Annalena Baerbock math, 10 years. 10 times 2, that's 20 years. Carry the 360 degrees, yeah, that's 20 years. In 20 years, NATO is going to go to war with Russia. They need to prepare. But I believe the most important line in this report is that NATO militaries will not be restricted by local regulations and will be free to transport consignments without normal restrictions. They've been talking about this for a while, NATO within Europe, within the European Union, to make it so that NATO militaries can move freely throughout the EU. No restrictions, no permissions, nothing. Standardize everything, standardize the roads, the transportation, the paperwork, the regulations, be done with the regulations so that NATO militaries can move freely within the European Union, within NATO member states. It makes me wonder, are these plans really about Russia, or are these plans about the NATO citizens? Is this about keeping Russia out, or is this really about keeping NATO countries in and down? I think that's the main question that everyone needs to ask. Anyway, that's the fear mongering from the Telegraph. I'm very worried about escalation with Russia and the miscalculation that could take us to a U.S.-Russia war, which would eventually lead to some sort of a nuclear war. I am very concerned about that, very concerned. Then I read articles like this from the Telegraph, and I say that this is all just fear-mongering and a bunch of bollocks. I don't know which one it is. But A lot of this fear and a lot of this planning to move armies freely in Europe and deregulate and get U.S. troops, more U.S. troops in Europe, and get the armies moving throughout Europe. A lot of this feels to me like this is more about keeping Europe locked in than keeping Russia out. Destroyed, bankrupt, and locked in, without any chance of the citizens rebelling or rising up. I don't know. Some days I think we're heading towards World War III. Then I read an article like this from the Telegraph and I say, come on now. Really, U.S. troops really are going to move through Europe so they can get to the borders of Russia and do what? Okay, so they get to the borders of Russia. And then what? Are they going to invade Russia? Really? And you're going to get those troops to the border of Russia? How long is that going to take? An hour? A week? No, months, right? And of course, Russia's going to see everything that's going on. Come on now. You're going to, what, invade Russia? NATO, United States, is that the plan? With all these arrows and all these maps? My thoughts on the Telegraph article. We'll be free to transport consignments without normal restrictions. So let's now discuss the next topic on the agenda, which is how Russia will retaliate to the escalation, the possible escalation of long-range missiles hitting Russian territory. And one of the rumors is that Russia will retaliate by knocking out the surveillance drones over the Black Sea. Alexander talked about this in his video update yesterday, and Alexander mentioned that this is a very plausible retaliation that Russia could do, and it makes sense because it's a retaliation that will absolutely piss off the collective West of the United States. You'll take out their surveillance drones in the Black Sea, but it doesn't risk moving us closer to a U.S.-Russia conflict. So it actually makes sense as far as a retaliation goes from Russia. And we have this report from Defense Security Asia. I don't know this publication. I don't know if this is legit. This could be BS. But they ran an article with the title, American-owned RQ-4B Global Hawk disappeared during operations in the Black Sea. Now, Alexander, in his video update yesterday, he mentioned that if Russia does decide to retaliate to the collective West escalation in Ukraine by knocking out the drones, the surveillance drones, it won't announce this retaliation, this method of retaliation. It'll just do it. And if this article is to be believed from Defense Security Asia, maybe Russia has started to knock down the drones over the Black Sea. This is possible. So what's the next story here? We have a quote from who? From Peskov, is it? He was asked about Western troops in Ukraine, specifically French troops. An article from the Washington Post published on Monday alleging that Russian President Putin might see hitting French troops if Russian forces can locate them as a chance to humiliate Macron. That is the question that he was asked. First of all, it doesn't need much to humiliate Macron. If French troops go to Ukraine, they already are in Ukraine, but if we start to see a large number of French instructors / troops going to Ukraine, then it's not really about Putin annihilating those French troops in order to humiliate Macron. Macron does a good job of humiliating himself. But what Peskov did say is that those French troops will have no immunity. The fact is that any instructors who are involved in training the military of the Ukrainian regime do not have any immunity, Peskov told reporters on Tuesday. And it doesn't matter whether they are French or not. It's not about humiliating Macron. It's about staying out of Ukraine. That's what it's about. So yeah, if French troops, a large number of French troops, start getting sent to Ukraine, the Russian military will annihilate them. They will have zero immunity. That's been clear for a while now. The Russian government has said that for a while. Any foreign troops in Ukraine, whether they're mercenaries, instructors, whatever, no immunity. And Peskov also, for the first time, called the United States an enemy. Dmitry Peskov previously referred to Washington and its allies as unfriendly states or opponents. Washington's refusal to allow former U.S. Marine, UN weapons inspector, and RT contributor Scott Ritter to travel to St. Petersburg for the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was the latest manifestation of the rabid campaign to prevent U.S. citizens from interacting with the Russian Federation, which would only be understandable if it was somehow related to his former intelligence status, Peskov told journalists on Tuesday. We are now an enemy country for them, much like they are for us, Peskov said, while acknowledging that restrictions applying to former intelligence officers, especially on travel to a hostile country, are common across the world. We are an enemy. We are their enemy. They are our enemy. And Peskov seems to be connecting the passport confiscation to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum and the fact that the United States does not want U.S. citizens, former intelligence officials interacting with the Russian Federation, which would only be understandable, Peskov said, if it was somehow related to his former intelligence status, in reference to the passport confiscation. So that's what Peskov said. And now let's talk about an article from the Financial Times, which is once again discussing the seizure of Russia's frozen assets before the G7 meeting takes place in Italy. The Financial Times has an article with the title, U.S. seeks EU sanctions guarantee to back $50 billion Ukraine loan. Washington needs Russian assets held in Europe to be frozen indefinitely to support fresh finance for Kiev. The U.S. is ready to lead a loan of $50 billion to Ukraine, repaid by profits from frozen Russian assets, if the EU can indefinitely extend sanctions against Moscow, according to a leaked discussion paper. Washington needs the EU to prolong the bloc's sanctions to Russian state assets, which expire every 6 months unless renewed by unanimous consent, until the end of the year, to ensure the U.S. is not left on the hook for repayments. Basically, what the U.S. is saying is that they will give Ukraine a $50 billion loan, profits from the $200 billion in Russian frozen assets, which are now in Brussels at Euroclear. The profits from the $200 billion would be used to pay back the 50 billion euro loan, and the U.S. is going to sign off on this loan to Ukraine. But the big condition that they have from the EU is that sanctions against Russia remain permanent. Keep the EU locked in and down. That's what this is all about, man. That is what the U.S. is doing to the European Union, and the European Union's gonna agree to all of this, absolutely. And this doesn't make the theft of the Russian frozen assets not a theft. This doesn't make this legit or legal. It still is stealing because the United States is still saying we'll give a 50 billion euro loan to Ukraine. But the condition is that the European Union keeps sanctions on Russia forever, or Russia pays us 50 billion against the Russian Federation pays us 50 billion against the 50 billion loan we gave to Ukraine. Precise details of the loan, including its maturity, interest rate, whether it would be provided directly or through an intermediary, such as the World Bank, remain to be determined, according to the paper. But Washington sees any such a loan as conditional on the EU allocating profits from the assets for repayment and guaranteeing that Russian central bank assets held in the EU remain immobilized until Russia has agreed to pay for the damage caused to Ukraine, according to the paper. Such a pledge is crucial because the bulk of Russia's assets are held in Belgium's central security depository Euroclear, generating an estimated $3 billion a year for profits. Should the profits fall short of required repayments, or should the EU fail to agree a rollover of sanctions, the U.S. would potentially be liable. The U.S. is discussing other potential options to share that risk with other G7 partners. Yeah, so I may even be wrong about that. The U.S. is asking of Russia, at least from what I read here from the Financial Times, the U.S. is saying that Russia has to, in order for this condition on the EU to be lifted, for the sanctions, EU sanctions against Russia to be lifted, the U.S. would require that Russia agree to pay for the damage caused to Ukraine. So the way I'm taking that is that Russia would agree to pay 300 billion, 400, 500, 600, whatever they decide is the cost for reparations to Ukraine. Only then will the U.S. allow the EU to lift sanctions against Russia. All of this for 50 billion euros to Ukraine. And then they'll give another 50 when Ukraine eats up that 50 billion. They'll give another 50 billion. And when Ukraine eats up that 50 billion, they'll give another 50 billion. And the 300 billion, because the EU sanctions on Russia, they're forever. And Russia's never going to pay the reparations of Ukraine to the collective West. They're never going to pay that. It basically means that the 300 billion over time, over like 10 or 20 years, everyone's going to forget about the 300 billion and they're going to take that as well. That's how all of this is going to go down. Anyway, all right. Switzerland's upper house rejects 5 billion Swiss franc aid plan for Ukraine. That's interesting. Switzerland is rejecting a 5 billion Swiss franc aid to Ukraine. Wow. I wonder if Switzerland is a bit upset about the Swiss Peace Summit and how it's made Switzerland look like fools. I wonder if that's what this is all about. Switzerland has come out of this whole Swiss Peace Summit thing looking really, really bad. So maybe they're saying, you know what? No 5 billion for you, Alinsky. And finally, let's do one more story and we will wrap this video up. And it has to do with the vote from the U.S. House to sanction the ICC over the Israel Netanyahu Gallant arrest warrants. U.S. votes to sanction ICC over Israel. Lawmakers want to punish the court for the Gaza war crimes probe. Speaker Johnson said the idea that they would issue an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel, Defense Minister of Israel at the time where they're fighting for their nation's very existence against the evil of Hamas as a proxy of Iran is unconscionable to us. And as I said a couple of weeks ago, the ICC has to be punished for this action. Khan! You will be punished, Khan! So that's Speaker Mike Johnson. He cares a lot about about the ICC arrest warrants against Netanyahu. He cares a lot about this issue, much more than he cares about the southern border, that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. So sanctions, it's going to be travel and financial sanctions against ICC officials and judges. What an amazing story. What an amazing story this is, huh? The ICC has been doing the empire's bidding for the last 20 plus years, right? They've been doing the bidding of the empire for the last 20 plus years, including last year's arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia didn't have this kind of a freakout, by the way. Keep in mind that the arrest warrant still has not been issued against Netanyahu or the defense minister. They're still looking at it. It still hasn't been approved. And they're having this freakout, a meltdown, where the arrest warrant was issued against Putin, and Russia was like, whatever. There were no sanctions. There was no crying. There was no whining. None of that. None of that. After the arrest warrant was issued, the Russian government was just stoic about it, man. They were just like, we don't recognize the ICC. This is nonsense. This is a tool of the collective West. We're moving on. The warrant still hasn't been issued, and we're seeing a meltdown taking place in the U.S. House with Speaker Johnson. Anyway, they've been doing the bidding of the ICC for the last 2 decades. They issued the arrest warrant against Putin last year, and the ICC is loved by the collective West, by the United States. They're legit. They're a real court. People must honor the arrest warrant against Putin. And what do you know it? South Africa makes an awesome chess move, a masterful chess move, and they push the ICC to investigate a warrant against Netanyahu and the Israeli defense minister. And now the United States is going to place sanctions on the ICC, travel and financial sanctions. What an amazing story. Let's do a clown world. So I can't confirm this, but it's interesting. Former Ukrainian Defense Minister Reznikov received American citizenship. I thought he was the ambassador to the UK. Can someone tell me in the comments down below who exactly is the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK? Is it Reznikov or is it Solushny? Does anyone know? Can anyone answer that? Or is it someone else? Anyway, Reznikov is now a US citizen. Okay. I guess we know where Reznikov is going to be hanging out when Project Ukraine crumbles. And we have this story, which a lot of people are asking me to comment on because it's from Cyprus, but to the occupied north of Cyprus. And that is the story that ran, which claimed the other day, which claimed that Alinsky, one of his companies called Film Heritage from the Panama Papers, was used to purchase a casino resort in the occupied north of the island. All I'm going to say is that, about this story, is that the Ukraine ambassador to Cyprus said this is Russian propaganda. He was interviewed and said this is Russian propaganda. He said for the reporters who are running this story to show receipts, to come out with evidence. That is what the Ukraine embassy in Cyprus said. Mainstream media in Cyprus, the big channels like Sigma and Alpha, they ran with this story and they reported on the casino in the north. The Cyprus government said they're looking into it, but they haven't seen any evidence of Alinsky purchasing a casino in the north. And then the casino in the north, the owners were interviewed and they said that this story is fake news. fake news is what they're saying. They explained what's going on. It was a Turkish media company, a Turkish paper, a blog, whatever, that reported on this. Because from what I understand, they saw on the website of the casino film heritage on the bottom, and they assumed that this was an Alinsky company from the Panama Papers that is now in ownership of the casino, when in fact, according to the current owners of the casino, Film Heritage is the company that designed the website. And the owners of the casino said that Alinsky has zero ownership of this casino, zero involvement in this casino, zero is what the current owners of the casino said. And the owners of the casino said they have zero plans of selling the casino or taking in other shareholders. And it's a Turkish group, Turkish company, Turkish group that currently owns the casino. So this story is looking like fake news. It would have been an interesting clown world, though, I must admit. Would have been interesting. Can you imagine if I was in Cyprus and I ran into Alinsky at his casino? Who's this? Podolyak, who is this guy? Mr. President, he's the guy that imitates you. What? He imitates me? Yes, I imitate you. Why you imitate me? I imitate you because I do reports about you. Oh, you do reports about me. Interesting. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, and Rockfin. And go to the Duran shop, Football 24. Pick up some football shirts as the parakeets and pigeons eat their lunch together. Take care.